The Florida sun beat down on Brutus, once the undisputed king of these wetlands. Now, his tawny fur hung matted over protruding ribs as he staggered through the sawgrass. Every step sent pain shooting through his injured leg, the same leg that had failed him in his final battle against younger rivals. The swamp, once his kingdom, had become a maze of suffering, and then his body gave out. Collapsing into the muck, he let out a shuddering breath. No pride to mourn him, no territory to defend, just the cruel hum of cicadas and the slow realization. This was how a monarch died. Alone. Ranger Chris Walker had patrolled these wetlands for 23 years. He knew the signs, the way the herons suddenly stilled, the unnatural ripple in the water. His binoculars lifted, scanning the cypress dome, and then he saw it, the limp golden form in the grass. Brutus, he whispered. His stomach dropped. He'd tracked this panther's reign, and his brutal fall from power. But what froze Chris's blood wasn't the panther's suffering. It was the other shape in the frame, a serpentine shadow, coiled tight around Brutus's torso. The python's grip tightened, and Chris knew. In minutes, Florida would lose one of its last wild kings. 2 years ago, Brutus's roar shook the pine uplands. 6 feet of muscle and instinct. His amber eyes missed nothing. Females followed him. Rivals feared him. Even the alligators gave way when he came to drink. But time is the great equalizer. The younger males, stronger, hungrier, came at dusk. The battle lasted mere minutes. A deep gash to his hind leg, a shattered canine tooth. And just like that, the legend became a ghost. Now, as the python's coils crushed his ribs, flashes of that old life flickered. The taste of fresh kill, the weight of cubs tumbling over his paws. Glory, reduced to this. It had been watching for hours. The Burmese python, thick as a fire hose, patterned like cracked leather, slithered forward with glacial patience. Prey the size was rare. The panther's labored breathing, the way his flank spasmed. Perfect. 1 strike, 2 loops around the chest. Brutus barely had time to wheeze before the pressure came. The python didn't hate, didn't gloat. It simply existed, a force of nature as indifferent as the hurricanes that shaped these swamps. And as it squeezed, the marsh fell silent. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. Brutus's claws tore at the mud, raking deep furrows. His hind legs kicked uselessly at the air. But the python had done this dance 1,000 times. Every gasp from the panther only tightened the coils. Crack. A rib gave way. Brutus's vision blurred at the edges. The cypress trees, the distant call of a limpkin, all fading to gray. Somewhere beyond the pain, a thought flickered. Is this how the gators felt when I took their hatchlings? Karma served cold and scaly. Then a new sound. Not the swamp. Not the snake. Something else. The sound was unbearable, like green branches snapping in a storm. Brutus's lungs burned for air that wouldn't come. His tongue lolled, pink foam dotting the grass. Death wasn't the worst part. It was the indignity, no final battle, no worthy opponent. Just a nameless predator doing what predators do. His body began to relax, accepting the inevitable. But then movement. Shadows shifting at the tree line. Massive, dark, watching. And in that moment, Brutus did something he'd never done in his life. He begged. Not with sound, but with his eyes. Please. Goliath's troop had seen it all. Poachers. Floods. Even the great hurricane of 17. But this? A panther and a python? Unusual. The silverback stood statue still, his black eyes tracking every twitch. The females fidgeted behind him. The juveniles craned their necks. Instinct said leave. Panthers were competitors. Dangerous. Yet, something held them there. Maybe it was the way Brutus's tail still twitched. A stubborn refusal to die. Maybe it was the python's arrogance, claiming a kill in their corner of the marsh. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the oldest law of all. No creature deserves this. Asterisk. At 540 pounds, Goliath moved like a mountain learning to dance. Slow, deliberate. His nostrils flared, taking in the scent of blood and musk. The python's tail lashed a warning. The silverback ignored it. Memories flickered. His own father, fallen to a hunter's bullet. The weeks his troop had circled the body, unwilling to leave. Brutus wasn't family, wasn't even the same species. But as the python reared up to deliver the final bite, Goliath's decision crystallized. A deep rumble built in his chest. The juveniles scrambled back. The females stiffened. And then, the sound that would echo through Ranger Chris's dreams for years. Every cell in Goliath's body screamed, "Stay out of this." Gorillas didn't rescue panthers. Gorillas didn't challenge pythons. But as Brutus's golden eyes met his, something primal overrode the rules. This wasn't about species or territory. This was about choice. The python struck. Fangs bared and time seemed to slow. Goliath's arm shot out, not to punch, not to grab, but to wedge between the snake's jaws and Brutus's throat. The python recoiled, hissing. The panther gasped, and in that heartbeat of stillness, the marsh itself seemed to whisper, "Nothing will ever be the same." The python struck again. Goliath roared, and then chaos. The silverback's fists pounded the snake's midsection like jackhammers. The females darted in, pulling at coils with surprising precision. Even the juveniles helped, screeching and throwing clumps of mud. Brutus, half-conscious, felt the pressure ease, then vanish. The last thing he saw before darkness took him. Goliath standing over him, chest heaving, holding the python's thrashing tail like a rodeo champ with a rogue bull rope. And as the snake slithered away, defeated, one thought echoed through the swamp. Why? Ranger Chris would spend decades trying to answer that. The swamp held its breath as Goliath rose to his full height. His silverback fur caught the fading light, each muscle taut with hesitation. 500 pounds of pure power, frozen in indecision. Behind him, the younger gorillas fidgeted, their eyes darting between their leader and the dying panther. Every instinct honed over centuries said to walk away. This wasn't their fight. This wasn't their kind. But then Brutus whimpered, a sound so unlike the mighty predator he'd once been, and something in Goliath's dark eyes shifted. The moment stretched, then shattered. What happened next would baffle biologists for years. With a roar that shook the cypress trees, Goliath charged. Not the clumsy lurch of an angry gorilla, but the focused sprint of a creature possessed. The python barely had time to uncoil before 500 pounds of fury slammed into it. Mud sprayed. Water erupted. The very ground seemed to tremble as nature's unwritten rules were rewritten before Ranger Chris's disbelieving eyes. "My God!" he whispered, fingers tightening on his binoculars. "They're actually—" The rest of the thought was lost to the chaos. The python fought back with prehistoric instinct, its coils whipping through the air like live wires. But Goliath was no ordinary opponent. His massive hands, capable of crushing bamboo stalks, found purchase on the snake's glistening scales. The struggle became primal theater. Constrictor versus crusher, reptile versus mammal, death versus something no one could quite name. Brutus lay forgotten between them, his shallow breaths fogging the mud as two apex predators battled over his broken body. The python squeezed. Goliath roared. And in that moment, the Everglades themselves seemed to pause. Then the impossible happened. Without signal or sound, the other gorillas joined. A female, they'd later call her Grace, grabbed the python's midsection with surprising precision. A younger male locked onto the tail. What followed wasn't the mindless violence of nature films, but something far more extraordinary. Coordination, strategy, almost compassion. They worked like a well-trained rescue team, each gorilla applying pressure at exactly the right point. The python, outmaneuvered for the first time in its life, began to loosen its grip. Brutus gasped as oxygen flooded back into his crushed lungs. The snake made one final attempt, its body coiling like a spring around Goliath's massive forearm. Muscles rippled. Scales gleamed. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the gorilla might lose his grip. Then, with a sound like wet rope snapping, the python relented. Whether from pain or sheer astonishment, its body went slack. Goliath didn't hesitate. With a grunt that spoke of generations of primate strength, he swung the 15-foot serpent through the air like a gruesome lasso, sending it sailing into the distant sawgrass. The splash echoed through the marsh. Then, silence. The panther didn't move. Mud caked his golden fur. His ribs rose once, twice, then stilled. The gorillas formed a silent circle around him, their chests heaving from exertion. Even Goliath seemed uncertain now, his intelligent eyes studying Brutus's limp form. Ranger Chris found himself holding his breath, the binoculars trembling in his hands. After such an extraordinary rescue, would it all be for nothing? Then a twitch, a shudder, a cough that sprayed pink foam across the grass. Brutus's amber eyes flickered open, clouded with pain but unmistakably alive. Protocol said to let nature take its course. 23 years of training screamed to stay in the jeep. But Chris Walker was already moving, his boots sinking into the muck as he sprinted toward the scene. The gorillas startled but held their ground as he dropped to his knees beside Brutus. His medical kit came open with a snap. Antiseptic, bandages, a syringe of painkillers meant for injured hikers, not wild panthers. "Easy, big guy," Chris murmured, hands moving with practiced urgency. Behind him, Goliath huffed not a threat, but a question. The ranger answered without looking up. "I know, buddy. I know." What happened next defied every wildlife manual ever written. As Chris worked, the gorillas didn't retreat, didn't attack. They simply shifted, forming a loose perimeter around man and panther both. Goliath took up position at Brutus's head, his dark eyes scanning the treeline. The females flanked the sides. Even the juveniles helped, keeping watch from a respectful distance. It wasn't guarding, wasn't ownership. It was something purer, a temporary truce written in glances and gestures. Chris felt the hair on his neck rise. In 23 years, he'd never seen anything like it. Never even dreamed. Then Brutus coughed. A wet, racking sound that turned into something like a growl. His front legs spasmed. His claws dug trenches in the mud. Chris fell back as the panther, the mighty Brutus, king of nothing and everything, staggered to his feet. The gorillas rumbled but didn't interfere. For one impossible moment, predator and protector stood frozen in tableau. The panther swaying like a drunkard, the gorillas poised but calm, the human holding his breath. Then Brutus took his first step. Then another. Each movement screamed pain but also something else. Something that made Chris's eyes burn. Dignity. The smallest gorilla, barely 3 years old, broke ranks first. With the fearless curiosity of youth, he reached out one knobby finger toward Brutus's flank. The panther turned, lips peeling back from yellowed fangs. A warning, a reminder, but not an attack. The gorilla didn't flinch, just touched. One light brush of fingertips against matted fur. Then Goliath grunted, and the moment broke. The troop began to melt back into the trees, their work done. Brutus watched them go, his sides heaving. Chris would swear later that the panther dipped his head. Just slightly, just once. Then Florida's last wild king turned and limped toward the setting sun. Every movement sent fire through Brutus's broken body. His left hind leg dragged uselessly. His ribs screamed with each shallow breath. But step by agonizing step, the old panther pushed forward, away from the gorillas, away from the human, away from the place he'd nearly died. The marsh grass whispered against his belly, wet with evening dew. Somewhere in the distance, an alligator bellowed. Brutus didn't flinch. Pain was familiar now. What surprised him was the strange lightness in his chest. Not from the crushed ribs. Something else. Something that made him pause at the water's edge and look back one last time. The gorillas moved like living shadows through the cypress knees. No celebration. No fanfare. Just the quiet rustle of foliage and the occasional soft grunt. Goliath brought up the rear, his silverback fur glowing faintly in the twilight. Once, twice, he stopped to glance over his massive shoulder. Not at Brutus limping away, not at the stunned human, but at the spot where it had happened, where the rules had changed. Then, with a final snort that might have been satisfaction or simply fatigue, the silverback melted into the trees. The swamp exhaled. The night birds resumed their songs, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred at all. The radio crackled in Chris's trembling hand. "Base, this is Walker. You're not going to believe." His voice broke. 23 years. He'd seen panthers take down fawns, watched bobcats play with their prey, even documented alligator cannibalism. But this defied every cruel truth he'd learned about nature. The dispatcher's voice came through, tinny and impatient. "Walker? Report." Chris swallowed hard, eyes still fixed on the empty clearing. The crushed grass, the mud streaked with serpentine tracks. "I just witnessed." He shook his head, laughed wetly. "Hell, I don't know what I witnessed, but I'll need the big camera. And maybe a priest." It wasn't Chris's best work, grainy, slightly blurred from shaking hands, but the image spoke volumes. Goliath standing over Brutus, one massive hand resting lightly on the panther's shoulder. Not restraining, not attacking, protecting. When the park posted it online, the internet exploded. "Fake!" screamed the skeptics. "Miracle!" cried the believers. Scientists debated primate-predator interactions. Preachers cited it in sermons. Late-night hosts cracked jokes. But for Chris, the photo's power wasn't in the debate it sparked. It was in what it captured that no one noticed. The way Brutus's eyes, clouded with pain, still held a glimmer of the king he'd once been. The emails poured in from Yale, from Cornell, even from National Geographic. Describe the gorilla's vocalizations. Estimate the python's length. Had Brutus previously interacted with this troop? Chris answered them all, but the truth was simple. He didn't know. No one did. Primatologists argued gorillas lacked the cognitive capacity for such targeted altruism. Ecologists insisted interspecies rescues only happened in Disney films. The most honest response came from an aging biologist who'd studied the Everglades since the 70s. "Sometimes," she wrote, "nature reminds us she's still got secrets, and we're damn fools to think otherwise." Chris framed that one. Mercy has no place in the wild, or so the textbooks say. But on quiet nights, when the marsh mist rose like ghosts, Chris found himself reconsidering. He'd seen Goliath's eyes that day, not the blank stare of instinct, but something deeper, something knowing. The way the silverback had hesitated, the careful precision of his intervention, even the troop's silent vigil afterward. These weren't random acts. They were choices. And if gorillas, our closest relatives, could choose mercy over survival, what did that say about the nature of nature itself? Chris's coffee would go cold pondering that one. Brutus should have died that day. By all the laws of ecology, by every metric of natural selection, his story was over. But here's the thing about wild places. They don't follow our rules. The old panther's survival became a quiet legend. Tourists whispered about him. Rangers left out extra water during droughts. Even the alligators seemed to give him wider berth. Because Brutus carried something now, not just scars, but proof. Proof that, in the relentless grind of survival, there might still be room for grace, for second chances, for the kind of miracle that walks on four legs and breathes through broken ribs. Maybe you felt like Brutus, pinned down by life's coils, certain the end has come. Or maybe you've been Goliath, strong enough to help, but afraid to intervene. This story isn't really about panthers and gorillas. It's about the choices we make when the rules no longer serve us. About reaching across divides of species, of circumstance, of simple difference, and saying no more. The marsh remembers. The cypress trees whisper it. And if an old ranger's tale can remind even one weary soul that rescue might come from the unlikeliest place, well, that's why we tell it. That photo changed things. Donations flooded the park's conservation fund. School kids wrote letters. A documentary crew arrived last spring. But here's what really matters. Brutus's marsh is shrinking. Goliath's troop faces new threats every year. And the pythons? They're not villains, just lost creatures themselves, dumped by irresponsible owners. You want to honor this story? Support habitat protection. Report invasive species. Volunteer at your local sanctuary. Because the wild isn't just out there. It's in our hands now. And if a gorilla can extend his, maybe we can too. Now we turn to you. Because this isn't an ending. It's an invitation. Maybe you've seen a stray dog protect a kitten. Watched crows mourn their fallen. Or perhaps, like Chris, you've witnessed something that defied all explanation. Share it in the comments. Tell your neighbors. Remind the world that kindness isn't uniquely human. It's woven into the very fabric of life. And who knows? Your story might be the one that gives someone their own Brutus moment. Their own reason to believe. Their own glimpse of grace in the grass. Asterisk 1 year later, under a blood-orange sunset, the motion sensors tripped at camera trap 14. Ranger Chris nearly dropped his coffee when he saw the footage. A familiar limping gait moving through the twilight. Brutus. Thinner now, his golden coat gone gray around the muzzle. But alive. The old panther paused at the exact spot where the python had nearly taken him, nostrils flaring as if catching some long-faded scent. Then, with deliberate care, he rolled in the dirt, not hunting, not marking territory. Just remembering. When he vanished into the sawgrass, he left behind something that made Chris's throat tighten. A single, perfect panther print overlapping with the ghost of a gorilla's hand. Asterisk. What no one knew, what Chris only pieced together later, was that Goliath had his own history with loss. Years before Brutus's ordeal, poachers had taken the silverback's mate and youngest offspring. The troop had circled the empty space for weeks, their grief written in the way they touched each other's fur just a little longer, a little gentler. When Goliath saw Brutus pinned beneath those coils, he didn't just see a rival predator. He saw himself, his family, the helpless rage of watching something precious slip away. Sometimes mercy isn't random. Sometimes it's memory in disguise. Asterisk, the Burmese python, 15 feet of muscle and instinct, didn't slither away unscathed. Rangers found its carcass 3 months later near Gator Hole number 7. Ribs crushed in a telltale pattern. The culprit? A 12-foot alligator with fresh scars around its midsection. Nature's irony was perfect. The hunter had become the hunted. The squeezer squeezed. Chris took no pleasure in the discovery, but he did snap a photo for the park's bulletin board. Underneath, he scribbled just 2 words. Circle completed. Asterisk. Asterisk, maybe it takes living 6 decades to truly understand what happened that day. Young biologists saw data points. YouTube commenters saw viral potential. But the elderly volunteers who staffed the visitor center? They nodded like they'd been expecting it all along. Mrs. Henderson, 82, put it best. When you've lost enough yourself, you recognize the moment someone decides to stop the cycle. She knitted sweaters for orphan raccoons and always left an extra $1 in the donation box. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts, had seen what the high-resolution cameras missed. The quiet triumph of kindness over instinct. Asterisk. Asterisk, the 3rd grade class from Pinecrest Elementary sent 23 handmade cards. 1 for each year of Chris's service. Little crayon gorillas reaching out to stick-figure panthers. Block letters declaring, I want to be like Goliath when I grow up. But it was the last card that undid him. A shaky purple panther with 1 bent leg, surrounded by black blobs. Beneath it, in a teacher's neat script, Janie says this is Brutus with his gorilla friends. She wants you to know even broken things still belong. Chris kept that one in his desk drawer, right next to his retirement papers. Asterisk. Brutus never fully recovered. His hunting days were over. His territory shrunk to a few meandering miles. Yet somehow the old cat became the park's unlikely peacemaker. Trail cameras caught him drinking beside deer, napping while armadillos rooted nearby, even tolerating a curious fox kit that trailed him for weeks. Rangers joked he'd gone Buddhist, but the truth was simpler. Brutus had learned what few predators ever do. that survival doesn't always mean solitude. When he finally passed, not from violence but time, they found him curled in a sunny patch of grass, with fresh gorilla prints circling the site. Goliath's troop began appearing at the marsh edge every dry season. Not to forage, not to play. They'd simply sit, staring across the water where it had happened. At first, Chris thought they were monitoring the python population. Then he noticed the timing, always during the golden hour, always when the light hit the cypress knees just so. Like they were waiting, remembering. The young gorilla who'd touched Brutus, now a strapping juvenile, would sometimes wade in, stirring the water with his fingers, looking for what no one could say. But when he lifted his hand, dripping with marsh water and memories, his mother would always groom him extra gently afterward. 2 years after the incident, a primatologist from Emory University made an astonishing find. While studying Goliath's troop, she recorded a new vocalization, a soft, warbling grunt never before documented in western lowland gorillas. They only made it in 2 situations, when encountering injured animals and when passing Brutus's marsh. The scientists theorized it might be a proto-word for vulnerable strength. The media dubbed it the mercy sound. Whatever its meaning, when Chris first heard the recording, he had to pull his truck over. Because after 23 years of wilderness sounds, he'd finally heard the voice of grace. Asterisk, the email came from a woman in Michigan. Her husband had loved panthers. After his passing, she'd been adrift, until she saw Brutus's story. For the first time, she wrote, I understood what people mean when they say grief is just love with no place to go. She enclosed a check for $5,000 and a request. Plant a cypress tree where the rescue happened. Chris did her one better. He planted 2, their roots would intertwine underground, the nursery promised. When he sent her the photo, she replied with a single line. Now both our boys have something living to remember them by. Asterisk. On his last patrol, Chris parked at Brutus's marsh. The new cypress saplings stood knee-high. The mercy sound played softly from his phone. And as the sunset painted the water gold, it hit him. He'd spent 23 years documenting nature's brutality, only to have his career defined by its tenderness. Maybe the wild wasn't just tooth and claw after all. Maybe, sometimes, it was also a silverback's steady hand. A panther's grateful glance. The way life surprises you when you least expect it. He left his badge on the dashboard and walked into the twilight, following the faintest echo of what might have been a gorilla's grunt, or just the wind, or both. Word of Brutus and Goliath spread beyond science journals. A veterans group adopted mercy crossings for their motto. Marriage counselors used the story in sessions. Even a hospice center painted murals of the panther and gorilla on their walls. Because in the end, this wasn't really about animals at all. It was about the choices that define us when darkness comes calling. Every time someone chose compassion over convenience, Brutus's legacy grew. Not in textbooks, not in research papers, but in the quiet moments when ordinary people remembered they could be extraordinary. The famous photo captured the rescue, but missed the aftermath. How Goliath lingered after his troop left. How he snapped a single cypress twig and placed it near Brutus's head like some primal get-well gift. How the panther, too weak to growl, blinked slowly, the feline equivalent of thank you. These details lived only in Chris's memory and the sworn testimonies of park volunteers. The world saw a viral moment. Those who looked deeper found a covenant written in mud and mutual respect. When trail cameras caught Goliath's troop standing over Brutus's final resting place years later, scientists debated the footage. Were they mourning? Curious? Establishing territory? Chris knew better. He saw the silverback pick up a sun-bleached panther vertebra, examine it with surprising gentleness, then tuck it into the crook of a cypress tree. Not as a trophy, as a keepsake. The young gorilla who'd first touched Brutus, now nearly grown, added a handful of wild grapes. The ritual lasted 7 minutes. Exactly how long it had taken to save a life. Brutus's marsh grew quieter after he passed. Fewer tourists came. The cameras were reassigned. But on still mornings, when mist curled off the water like ghosts, long-time visitors swore they could see them. a shadowy panther limping beside a massive silverback shape. Optical illusions, said the skeptics. Wishful thinking, shrugged the rangers. Yet even the most hardened biologists stopped removing the small offerings that appeared at the site: wildflowers, polished stones, the occasional child's drawing. Some truths don't need proof. They just need someone to keep the vigil. When audio of Goliath's unique grunt hit social media, something unexpected happened. Grieving parents played it at memorials. Therapists used it in trauma sessions. A composer wove it into a symphony titled Unexpected Grace. The sound, raw, guttural, yet undeniably tender, became a global shorthand for compassion against all odds. Scientists still debate its meaning. But in a Chicago hospice, when nurses play the recording for patients nearing the end, nobody asks for a peer-reviewed study. They just reach for their loved one's hands and listen. Asterisk. The park's elderly female volunteers weren't surprised by the story. They'd nod knowingly, their weathered hands stilling over birdseed bins or first aid kits. "Seen it before?" murmured Esther, 78, as she patched up an injured owl. "You live long enough, you learn. The heart keeps score in ways the mind can't fathom." Then she'd share her own tales, of nursing home friendships that crossed racial divides, of estranged children reconciled at hospital bedsides. Brutus and Goliath's story wasn't unique to her. Just the latest proof that when the world says hate, love whispers, try anyway. Asterisk. On Chris's final day, he placed 2 items at Brutus's marsh: his tattered field notebook and a bag of sunflower seeds. The notebook contained 23 years of observations, including 3 blank pages after the rescue. Some things he'd written can't be captured in ink. The seeds? Private joke. Early in Brutus's recovery, the panther had developed a bizarre habit, stealing them from bird feeders, licking off the salt, then spitting out the shells. Chris would grumble about the mess. Now, he hoped some scrappy cardinal or squirrel might enjoy the treat. The circle, always the circle. The marsh holds its secrets close. Why did Goliath intervene? Did Brutus ever understand? We'll never know for certain, but perhaps the deeper lesson lies in the not knowing, in accepting that some bonds defy explanation, that mercy needs no justification. As the world grows louder with division, Brutus's marsh remains, a place where water still reflects both predator and protector, where cypress roots intertwine beneath the surface, where every rustle in the sawgrass could be the wind or something more. The wild doesn't offer answers, just invitations to look closer. Now this story becomes yours. Maybe you'll donate to wildlife rehab, volunteer at a shelter, or simply pause next time you're tempted to walk past suffering. Brutus and Goliath's legacy isn't in documentaries or donations. It's in the small, daily choices to see across divides. So tell me in the comments, when has unexpected grace found you? Whose hand reached out when you were pinned by life's coils? Let's create a living record of mercy, one story at a time. Because the truth? We're all both panther and gorilla, broken, capable of rescue, and worthy of both. As the screen fades, let's leave with this, the image of 2 trees growing where 1 panther and 5 gorillas once rewrote the rules. Their branches don't touch. Not yet. But beneath the surface, their roots are already entwined, passing nutrients back and forth in the dark. A silent pact between unlikely partners. This is nature's final word on the matter. We survive alone. We thrive together. And sometimes, if we're brave enough to accept help from unexpected places, we get to see our scars become someone else's map. Thanks for watching. Now go be someone's miracle.